Ever wondered if the person you trust most could be living a double life? What if the love, laughter, and years of loyalty were just a facade, hiding secrets darker than betrayal? For Daniel, it started with a whisper, a quiet, lingering glance, a conversation behind closed doors. But when a terrified young man knocks on his door, clutching a manila envelope, Daniel's world begins to unravel. What's inside that envelope will change everything he thought he knew about his wife, his marriage, and even his own family. Lies, obsessions, and a sinister truth hidden in plain sight. Stay with us until the end, because this story will leave you questioning how well you really know the ones closest to you. I've always trusted my instincts. In my line of work as a translator, attention to detail is second nature. You catch patterns in speech, in writing, even in people. So when I noticed Marissa's behavior shift, it wasn't sudden. It was gradual, like a distant storm on the horizon, slowly creeping closer. It started with small things, the way she'd linger on her phone after dinner, her laughter sounding just a bit too animated when I wasn't part of the conversation. But I told myself I was imagining things. After all, we'd been married for 12 years. She was a dedicated English teacher and a loving wife. There wasn't a single reason to suspect her of anything, at least, that's what I convinced myself. The real cracks appeared on a Tuesday night. I came home earlier than usual, expecting to surprise her with takeout from her favorite Thai place. The house was unusually quiet, save for faint murmuring coming from the living room. At first, I thought she was on a call, maybe catching up with her sister. But something about her tone pulled me toward the door. I stood there, unseen, watching her. She was seated cross-legged on the couch, her face illuminated by the glow of her phone. Her expression, it wasn't the face of a wife chatting with a family member. It was softer, her eyes lit with something I hadn't seen in a long time. Desire? Excitement? It twisted something deep inside me. "Of course, I can't wait to see you again," she said softly, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. My heart stopped. I stepped closer, and the floor creaked beneath my weight. Marissa's head whipped toward me, her eyes widening in shock. For a moment, time froze between us. She fumbled to turn off her phone, the casual smile replaced with panic. "Daniel. I didn't hear you come in," she said, standing quickly, brushing her hair behind her ear like she always did when she was nervous. "You're home early." I didn't respond right away. My mind was spinning, trying to make sense of what I'd just witnessed. Who had she been talking to? Why did she sound like that? "I wanted to surprise you," I said, holding up the bag of takeout. My voice was calm, but my chest felt tight. "But it looks like I'm the one who's surprised." Her smile faltered. "Oh, that's sweet. I was just chatting with one of my students. His English is improving so much." A student? That was plausible. Marissa had a reputation for going above and beyond for her students, especially those struggling to grasp the language. But something didn't sit right. She wasn't the same Marissa I'd kissed goodbye that morning. There was a distance in her eyes, a wall I hadn't noticed before. "Is that so?" I asked, setting the food on the counter. "Which student?" Her hesitation lasted a beat too long. "Nico. You remember him, right? The boy from Spain. He's been making great progress." Nico. I did remember him. He was only 19, here on an exchange program. Marissa had mentioned him before, always with a teacher's pride, talking about his struggles to adapt and how she'd taken him under her wing. But now, it sounded different. "You've been spending a lot of time with him," I said casually, opening the takeout containers. "More than usual." She laughed, a little too loudly. "Oh, don't be silly. It's all professional. He's just very eager to learn, and I like seeing him succeed." I nodded slowly, watching her over the rim of my glass as I poured water. But my instincts told me there was more to this story, something hidden beneath her words. As we sat down for dinner, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't sitting across from my wife. I was sitting across from a stranger. I stood by the window, watching Marissa pull out of the driveway, her car disappearing down the street. She'd left earlier than usual, claiming she had a meeting with the school board. "It's nothing exciting," she said over breakfast, brushing it off casually. "Just some administrative stuff." I nodded, pretending not to notice the way her eyes darted toward her phone. Normally, she left around 8:30 a.m., but today, she was out the door by 7:45. It wasn't like her to rush out without finishing her coffee, and the sudden urgency gnawed at me. I told myself it was paranoia. I was letting last night's weirdness get to me. But then came the knock on the door. I wasn't expecting anyone. The sound startled me, pulling me out of my thoughts. When I opened the door, I found a young man standing on the porch, clutching a manila envelope. "Daniel?" he asked, his voice uncertain. "Yeah," I replied, eyeing him carefully. He looked nervous, pale, shaky, like someone carrying a heavy burden. He glanced over his shoulder, as if he was afraid of being followed. "My name's Nico." I froze. Nico. The student Marissa had mentioned so many times. The one she was supposedly helping improve his English. "I shouldn't be here," he muttered, thrusting the envelope into my hands. "But you need to know." Before I could ask any questions, he turned and hurried away, disappearing down the street. I stared after him, stunned, before closing the door. My heart pounded in my chest as I sat at the kitchen table, the envelope in my lap. Why the hell would Marissa's student show up at my house? And what did he mean by, "you need to know"? With trembling fingers, I opened the envelope. The first thing I saw was a photo, and it made my stomach drop. It was Marissa. She was sitting at an outdoor cafe, leaning in close to someone across the table. Her smile was soft, her eyes full of warmth and affection. It wasn't a teacher comforting a struggling student. It was something much more personal. I flipped to the next photo. This time, I saw the face of the person sitting with her. It wasn't Nico. It was a man in his early 20s, with dark hair and a confident smirk. I didn't recognize him, but the way Marissa looked at him in the picture made it painfully clear that she did. I pulled out the note that was tucked inside. "She's not who you think she is. Watch your back." I stared at the note, my mind spinning. Why would Nico give this to me? What was his connection to Marissa? And why did he look so terrified when he handed it over? Before I could process what I'd just seen, my phone buzzed on the table. It was Marissa. "Hey, love. Just finished up at school. Heading to the store. Need anything?" I stared at the message, my heart pounding. She wasn't at a meeting. She wasn't at school. And now, I had to figure out where she really was, and who she was with. Marissa's text sat on my screen like a time bomb. "Hey, love. Just finished up at school. Heading to the store. Need anything?" It was a perfectly normal message. But nothing felt normal anymore. I looked back at the photos spread across the table. The image of Marissa, smiling warmly at that young man, burned into my mind. The note, "Watch your back," echoed in my thoughts like a warning I couldn't ignore. She wasn't at school. That much was clear. And if she wasn't at a school meeting, then where was she? Without giving myself time to second guess, I grabbed my keys and jacket. I had to know. I drove toward her school, my grip tight on the steering wheel. The streets of Millbrook were quiet in the late morning, a slow drizzle misting the windshield. I couldn't stop replaying Nico's panicked expression, the photos, the note. Why had he come to me? Why not confront Marissa directly? What was he afraid of? The school parking lot was nearly empty when I pulled in. Her car wasn't there. I sat for a moment, staring at the building. Then my phone buzzed again. Another text from Marissa. Everything okay? You're quiet today. I clenched my jaw. The nerve of her, texting me like everything was fine, like our life wasn't unraveling. I thought about confronting her right then and there, sending a message demanding to know where she really was. But something stopped me. No. I need proof. I need to know the whole story before I let her know I'm onto her. I glanced at my phone again, scrolling through old messages. One caught my eye, a casual text from a few weeks ago, mentioning that she and some colleagues were grabbing coffee at Fernwood Cafe. The same cafe in the photo Nico gave me. I didn't think. I just drove. When I pulled up to Fernwood Cafe, my heart was pounding. I parked across the street, my eyes scanning the tables outside. There she was. Marissa sat at a corner table, her back to me. She was laughing, her hand resting on the arm of the man sitting across from her. The same man from the photos. The way she leaned in, the way she smiled at him, it wasn't how she looked at me anymore. I felt a cold knot tighten in my chest. But before I could dwell on the betrayal, something caught my attention. The man reached across the table, handing Marissa a small package wrapped in brown paper. She glanced around nervously before slipping it into her purse. What the hell was that? This wasn't just an affair. This was something else entirely. I grabbed my phone and snapped a photo of them through the windshield. If Marissa thought she could lie her way out of this, she was wrong. But just as I was about to leave, a familiar figure appeared, walking briskly toward the cafe. It was Nico. I watched in stunned silence as Nico approached the table. Marissa saw him coming and tensed, her smile vanishing. She glanced at the man across from her, who stood quickly, his expression darkening. Nico stopped a few feet away, his posture rigid. He looked nothing like the nervous kid who'd shown up at my house. Why are you here? Marissa hissed, her voice sharp enough to carry across the street. You think I'm going to keep quiet? Nico snapped. After everything you've done? My heart raced as I watched the confrontation unfold. Marissa stood, lowering her voice as if to calm him. But her body language was tense, defensive. I told you, she said. It's under control. You don't need to get involved. Under control. Nico's voice rose. You think I'm just going to disappear and pretend none of this happened? You ruined my life. Marissa's companion stepped between them, glaring at Nico. Keep your voice down, he said coldly. We don't want to make a scene. Nico's gaze flicked to the package in Marissa's purse. You still don't get it, do you? You're in way over your head. For a moment, no one moved. Then Marissa's phone buzzed in her hand. She glanced down at it, her expression shifting. She turned slowly, her eyes locking on me. I didn't realize I was still holding my phone until it buzzed in my hand. Another message from Marissa. Are you following me? Our eyes met across the street, her expression a mix of shock and fury. I didn't answer. I just started the car and drove away. But as I left, one thing was certain. This wasn't just about infidelity. Marissa wasn't just lying to me. She was hiding something much, much bigger. And now, I was more determined than ever to find out what it was. I drove aimlessly for what felt like hours, the image of Marissa at the cafe burned into my mind. Her laughter, her affectionate gaze, the way she leaned in toward that man, it was all too familiar. But this wasn't the woman I thought I knew. When my phone buzzed with another text from her, I ignored it. Are you following me? I couldn't answer. Not yet. Eventually, I found myself parked outside a modest apartment complex on the south side of town. It was Nico's place, I'd found the address easily enough. Something about the boy's terrified expression when he handed me that envelope haunted me. I needed answers. Taking a deep breath, I got out of the car and walked to the door labeled 4B. I knocked firmly. A few seconds later, the door creaked open. Nico stood there, looking smaller and more vulnerable than he had that morning. His eyes were bloodshot, his expression wary. "You again," he muttered, glancing nervously down the hallway. "Why are you here?" "Because you showed up at my house with those photos," I said. "Because I need to know the truth." He hesitated, his hand tightening on the doorknob. Then he sighed heavily and stepped aside. "Come in." Inside, the apartment was cramped and cluttered. Textbooks, papers, and empty coffee cups littered the small living room. I sat down on the couch while Nico paced the room, rubbing his hands together anxiously. "I shouldn't be talking to you," he said. "I've already said too much." "You've already started," I replied calmly. "So finish it. Tell me what's going on." Nico stopped pacing, running a hand through his hair. He looked exhausted, like he hadn't slept in days. "It's not what you think," he said finally. "Then what is it?" I asked. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like my wife has been meeting up with younger men behind my back." He winced at the word wife. "It's complicated." He swallowed hard. "Marissa, she's not well." I leaned forward, my chest tightening. "What do you mean?" She has this thing," he said, struggling to find the right words. "This need. It's like she can't stop herself. She gets obsessed with younger guys. Especially ones who depend on her." My stomach twisted. "What are you saying?" He sank into the chair across from me, burying his face in his hands. "She's been doing this for a long time," he whispered. "She finds someone young, someone vulnerable, a student, usually, and she draws them in. At first, it seems harmless. She helps with schoolwork, gives advice, acts like a mentor. But then?" I prompted, my voice tight. He looked up, his eyes filled with shame. "Then it changes. She starts crossing boundaries. Compliments that feel too personal. Hugs that last too long. And before you know it, you're caught." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. "And you?" I asked quietly. "She did this to you?" Nico nodded slowly, his gaze dropping to the floor. "I thought she was just being kind," he said. "I didn't have anyone else here. My family's back in Spain, and I felt alone. She made me feel like I mattered. Like I was special." A bitter laugh escaped him. "But it wasn't kindness. It was something else. Something darker." He clenched his fists, his voice shaking. "She started showing up at my apartment. At first, she said it was just to check on me. Then she started touching me. Saying things that made me uncomfortable. I tried to push her away, but she wouldn't stop." My heart pounded in my chest. "You're saying she forced you?" Nico nodded again, tears brimming in his eyes. "I told her no. I told her I didn't want it. But she kept coming back. She said if I told anyone, she'd ruin me. That no one would believe me." I sat back, the room spinning around me. This wasn't just infidelity. This was abuse. "Why didn't you go to the police?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Nico shook his head. "Who would believe me? I'm just a kid from another country. She's a respected teacher, a wife, a mother. People love her. They wouldn't believe she could do something like this." I rubbed my hands over my face, trying to process the horror of what I was hearing. "What about the photos?" I asked. "Why did you give them to me?" "Because I couldn't take it anymore," he said. "She found someone new, that guy you saw her with today. And she left me alone. But I can't. I can't just pretend it didn't happen." His voice broke. "She destroyed me. And I couldn't let her keep doing it. The drive home was a blur. I couldn't shake Nico's words. The image of him, broken and haunted, was seared into my mind. Marissa wasn't just having an affair. She wasn't looking for excitement or a way to fill a void in her life. She was sick. And she was hurting people. When I finally pulled into the driveway, my hands were shaking. Marissa's car was already there. The porch light was on, casting long shadows across the front yard. I sat in the car for a long time, staring at the house. The home we'd built together. The life we'd shared. It was all a lie. Finally, I got out of the car and walked inside. Marissa was waiting for me in the living room, her arms crossed, her expression tense. "We need to talk," she said. I nodded slowly, my gaze never leaving hers. "Yes," I agreed, my voice cold. "We do." The house was eerily quiet as I stepped inside. Marissa stood in the living room, arms crossed, her lips pressed into a thin line. "We need to talk," she said again, her tone clipped. There was no trace of guilt or remorse in her expression. If anything, she looked annoyed. As if I were the one who'd done something wrong. I studied her face, the woman I'd loved for 12 years. I used to think I could read her like a book. But now, standing across from her, I realized I didn't know her at all. "Where were you this morning?" I asked, keeping my voice calm. "I told you," she said, her eyes narrowing slightly. "I had a meeting at the school." "Don't lie to me." The words came out sharper than I intended. Marissa flinched, just for a second, before her expression hardened again. "I'm not lying," she said. "Why would I lie about that?" I stepped closer, keeping my gaze locked on hers. "Because I followed you." Her face paled. "You, what?" "I saw you at the cafe," I continued. "With him. And I know about Nico." Marissa's mouth opened, then closed again. For a moment, I saw something flicker in her eyes, panic, maybe. Or fear. "You've been spying on me?" she asked, her voice trembling with indignation. "That's how little you trust me." "You're damn right I don't trust you," I snapped. "Not after everything I've learned." Marissa pressed her hands to her temples, shaking her head. "This isn't fair, Daniel. You don't understand." "Then help me understand," I said coldly. "Tell me why you've been forcing yourself on your students. Why you've been meeting strange men in secret. What the hell is wrong with you?" Her eyes darted around the room, as if looking for an escape. "Daniel, it's complicated." I let out a bitter laugh. "It's not complicated. It's sick." She took a step back, her hands trembling. "You don't know what it's like," she whispered. I can't control it. Sometimes, I feel like I'm watching myself from the outside, doing things I know are wrong, but I can't stop." "That's not an excuse." "I'm not making excuses," she snapped, her voice rising. "I'm telling you the truth. I'm broken, Daniel. I've been broken for a long time." Her words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. But I wasn't ready to forgive. Not yet. "What about Nico?" I asked. "Do you have any idea what you've done to him? How much damage you've caused?" Marissa's expression crumpled. "I never meant to hurt him," she whispered. I thought he wanted it, too." I stared at her in disbelief. She actually believes that. Before I could say more, she suddenly turned on her heel and walked toward the stairs. "Where are you going?" I demanded. She didn't answer. I followed her up the stairs, my pulse pounding in my ears. She headed straight for our bedroom, yanked open the closet, and pulled down a shoebox from the top shelf. "What's that?" I asked, my voice cold. Marissa hesitated, hugging the box to her chest. It's my diary. I blinked. Your diary? She nodded slowly. I've kept it for years. Everything I've done, everything I've felt, it's all in here. I stared at the box, my mind racing. Why are you showing me this now? Because you need to know the truth, she said, tears streaming down her face. The real truth. Reluctantly, she handed me the box. I opened it slowly, my hands shaking. Inside were several worn notebooks, their covers scuffed and faded. I picked up the one on top and flipped it open to the first page. What I read made my blood run cold. I met him today. Nico. He's perfect. So young, so vulnerable. I know it's wrong, but I can't help myself. I need him to see me. To love me. I flipped through the pages, my heart pounding as I read entry after entry detailing Marissa's obsessions, not just with Nico, but with other young men. And then I saw it. A name that stopped me cold. I can't stop thinking about Thomas. I froze. Thomas? My brother. I looked up, my vision blurring with rage. You went after my brother? Marissa backed away, her face twisted in anguish. It wasn't like that. When? I demanded. When did this happen? It was before we got married, she sobbed. I was lost back then. I didn't know what I was doing. I couldn't breathe. Thomas had never told me. He'd never hinted at anything like this. But now, everything made sense, the way he'd distanced himself from me after I married Marissa, the strained conversations, the awkward silences. It wasn't just about me. Marissa had been breaking people long before Nico. You've been doing this for years, I whispered. Haven't you? She collapsed onto the bed, her sobs shaking her body. I don't know how to stop, she cried. I don't know how to fix myself. I stood there, staring at the broken woman in front of me. The woman I'd once loved. And for the first time, I realized I wasn't just dealing with betrayal. I was dealing with a monster. I stood frozen in the bedroom, clutching Marissa's diary. The name Thomas stared back at me like a curse. My brother. The same brother who stopped calling after my wedding. The same brother who skipped family gatherings, always making excuses. The same brother who warned me once, and only once, before disappearing from my life. Are you sure about her? He'd asked the night before my wedding. Back then, I'd brushed it off. I thought he was just being protective. But now I understood. You destroyed my family, I whispered. Marissa's head snapped up. I didn't. Don't lie to me. I roared, throwing the diary onto the bed. You went after my brother, Marissa. I couldn't even finish the sentence. The words tasted like poison. I was sick back then, she said, her voice trembling. I didn't understand what I was doing. I shook my head slowly. You knew. You've always known. Her sobs filled the room, but I felt nothing. I couldn't feel pity. I couldn't feel love. All I felt was rage. I stormed out of the house, needing air. My mind was spinning, memories of Thomas flashing through my mind. The way he'd avoided me, the way he'd cut himself off from our family. I grabbed my phone and dialed his number. The call went straight to voicemail. Thomas, it's Daniel. We need to talk. Please call me back. I hung up, pacing the driveway like a caged animal. My hands shook as I lit a cigarette, the first one in months. A familiar ache settled in my chest, the ache of realizing that the life I thought I had was a lie. Marissa wasn't just my wife. She was a predator. And I'd been blind to it for years. An hour later, my phone buzzed. Thomas. I answered immediately. Thomas. Daniel. His voice was cautious, guarded. I need to ask you something, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. There was a long pause. It's about her, isn't it? My heart sank. You knew. Another pause. I didn't want to get in the middle of it. I figured if you were happy. She went after you, I said quietly. Didn't she? Thomas exhaled sharply. It was a long time ago. Tell me what happened. He hesitated, then finally spoke. It was before you two got serious. I was staying with you for a few weeks, remember? She kept finding excuses to talk to me. To be alone with me. I closed my eyes, the weight of his words crushing me. And I told her to stop, he said. But she didn't take it well. She kissed me, Daniel. I pushed her away. Told her it was wrong. She said it was just a mistake. But after that, I couldn't look at her the same way. My stomach turned. Why didn't you tell me? I didn't want to hurt you, he said softly. I thought she'd changed. That maybe it was just a one-time thing. I ran a hand through my hair, trying to steady my breathing. It wasn't. I figured. His voice was quiet. She's still doing it, I said, my voice hardening. She's been targeting her students. She forced one of them, a boy named Nico. Jesus Christ. The silence between us stretched painfully. I'm sorry, Daniel, Thomas said finally. I should have told you back then. No, I said. She's the one who should be sorry. Thomas sighed. What are you going to do? I don't know. But I did know. I was going to make sure Marissa never hurt anyone again. I went back inside, my mind made up. Marissa was still sitting on the bed, her face pale, her eyes swollen from crying. You talked to him, didn't you? She asked. Yes. She nodded slowly, as if she'd expected it. And now you hate me. I don't even know you, I said. The person I married doesn't exist. She never did. Her eyes filled with fresh tears. Daniel, please. I'm sick. I need help. I don't want to be like this. I crossed my arms, keeping my distance. You need help. Fine. Get it. But don't expect me to stand by you. Not after what you've done. What are you saying? I'm saying it's over. She shook her head, panic spreading across her face. No, Daniel, please. I can change. I can get better. But I'd heard enough. I've already lost one brother because of you, I said. I won't lose myself, too. I turned and walked out, leaving her sobbing on the bed. As I stepped outside, the weight lifted slightly. This wasn't just about betrayal anymore. It was about taking back control. And I wasn't going to let her destroy anyone else's life. I didn't go back home that night. Instead, I sat by the river, Nico's words haunting me. Thomas. My brother. The one who distanced himself after my wedding. The warning he gave me echoed in my mind, are you sure about her? I dialed his number. He answered on the third ring. You knew, I said. A long pause. I didn't want to get in the middle of it. She went after you, I pressed. It was before you got married, Thomas admitted quietly. She kissed me. I pushed her away. I thought she'd changed. I thought you were happy. She hasn't changed, I said. She's hurting more people. Silence. Then, what are you going to do? I didn't answer, but I knew. Marissa was waiting for me when I returned. You talked to him, she said, pale and shaken. Yes. He told me everything. Her voice cracked. I'm sick, Daniel. I need help. You need consequences, I replied. I'm filing for divorce. And I'm going to the police. No, please, she cried. What about the kids? What about our life? There is no life, I said coldly. It was a lie. Later that afternoon, I sat across from Detective Karen Blake, sliding Marissa's diary and the photos across the desk. We've had complaints before, Blake said grimly. But nothing solid. Until now. She's dangerous, I said. She preys on people who trust her. We'll take it from here. The police came that evening. I watched from my car as they cuffed Marissa in the driveway. She looked at me, defeated, broken. As they drove away, I felt nothing but relief. At the trial, both Thomas and Nico testified. Their words were raw and powerful, exposing the woman who had hidden her sickness behind a mask of respectability. When the judge read the verdict, guilty on all counts, I finally breathed again. A year later, I stood by the river with Thomas. You ever think about her? He asked. Sometimes, I said. She was sick, but that doesn't excuse it. Thomas nodded. We made it, though, he said with a quiet smile. Yeah, I agreed. We did. The past was still there, a shadow I couldn't escape. But for the first time in years, I felt free.